Last summer, I went to the countryside where my grandparents lived to enjoy the summer vacation. My grandparents live in a rural area quite far from the city where my family and I live. Every summer I visit, and every time I see my friend Tom. Tom and I have known each other since we were children, and we always had fun together. Tom's family has a farm with about 10 cows. When we were children, we often took the cows out to eat grass. This time, I asked my parents to let me sleep and play with Tom for a few nights. Tom's farm is near a cemetery, a common cemetery for several nearby villages. The graves are hidden in a dense forest, not in open fields like other places. For me, it was a bit scary, but for Tom, it wasn't because he had lived there since he was a child. The first night at Tom's house, we slept on the second floor of his bungalow. The house had a brick first floor and a wooden second floor. Even though it was a 2-story house, the distance from the ground to the second floor window was only about 10 feet. This window faced the forest and the cemetery. We stayed up late, talking and laughing, catching up on everything we'd missed since last summer. Around midnight, I experienced something scary. I had sleep paralysis, but what's worth mentioning is that before I had sleep paralysis, I heard the sound of someone walking up the stairs, approaching where I was sleeping. Then, my whole body became motionless. I tried to struggle, but it was useless. Those who have experienced sleep paralysis will understand how I felt. Finally, the paralysis disappeared, and I was able to move again. I lay there, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was just a dream and get some sleep. The next morning, I told Tom about my experience. He laughed it off and said I was too tired and that sleep paralysis was nothing scary. I tried to believe him, but fear lingered in my mind. The second night, it suddenly rained with thunder and lightning. The sound of the storm was very loud. I had difficulty sleeping because I was not used to the hard cabin floor. It was probably around midnight before I started to fall asleep. I slept with my head facing the window, watching the rain hit the glass, lightning flashing every now and then. Suddenly, I was horrified to see a woman standing in the rain at the edge of the forest. Through the flashes of lightning, I saw her standing there and looking at me. Her eyes seemed to pierce the darkness, looking straight at me. I closed my eyes tightly and thought I was dizzy. When I opened my eyes again, the woman had indeed disappeared. Feeling uncomfortable, I stood up to get a glass of water. When I reached the coffee table, I stiffened with horror. The woman from before was standing right outside the window, staring at me. A large woman with a peasant face, looking somewhat like a man, stared at me. I screamed in horror, waking the whole house. The light turned on in the house and the woman disappeared. I looked through the window and in the flash of lightning, saw the woman running with long steps very fast towards the forest. The woman ran like an athlete performing a triple jump, and she quickly disappeared into the forest. Everyone gathered around to ask what was going on. I described everything in detail about the woman's appearance. Tom's family exchanged worried looks, and I could tell they realized something, but no one said anything. That night, we didn't sleep. Tom's parents stayed up with us, and I could see the worry in their eyes. As soon as it was morning, I called my dad to come pick me up. I left Tom's house feeling a mixture of relief and lingering fear. My father and I drove to my grandparents' house, and the next day I returned to the city. But my obsessions still haven't ended. What was Tom's family's attitude when they heard me tell about the woman? And who is this woman? When she stands as tall as the second floor window, does that mean she must be very tall? Is there a woman who is 10 feet tall? These questions haunted me as I tried to move on with my life. The image of the tall woman staring at me through the window was something I couldn't forget. Even now, back in the city, every time it rains, I can't help but feel a shiver down my spine, wondering if she is still out there, watching, waiting. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. What happened to me in Green Hollow Forest still haunts me to this day. It all began on a crisp autumn day when my fiancé Jack and I decided to spend the weekend hiking in the forest. We wanted to escape the city and enjoy some peace and quiet. Jack and I had been together for 5 years, and we were both avid hikers. We met in college, bonded over our love for the outdoors, and had been inseparable ever since. Jack was the adventurous one, always looking for new trails and hidden spots to explore. I, on the other hand, loved the tranquility of the woods and the feeling of being surrounded by nature. We chose Green Hollow Forest for our weekend getaway because of its reputation for beautiful trails and serene landscapes. It was a sprawling forest, known for its thick canopy of trees that created a natural tunnel of greenery. The forest was dense, with old-growth trees that seemed to reach the sky, their branches intertwining overhead. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves, which crunched under our boots as we walked. We set off early in the morning, armed with a map, our backpacks, and a sense of excitement. The trail we chose was well marked and popular with hikers. As we walked, we talked about our future, our plans for the wedding, and the house we wanted to buy. The forest was beautiful, with the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. After several hours of hiking, we came across a narrow, overgrown path that wasn't marked on our map. Jack, always the adventurous one, suggested we follow it. "Come on, Sarah, it'll be fun," he said with a grin. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees became, their branches intertwining to create a shadowy tunnel. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence fell over the forest. It felt like the woods were watching us. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The forest seemed different here, darker and more oppressive. The sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of moss. Strange symbols were carved into the trees, twisted and unfamiliar. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. Suddenly, we heard a soft, melodic humming. It was hauntingly beautiful, yet unnerving. We followed the sound until we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its bark blackened and gnarled. At its base, we saw what appeared to be an old well, covered in moss and vines. Drawn by an inexplicable force, I approached the well. The humming grew louder, more insistent. I peered over the edge, expecting to see darkness. Instead, I was met with a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the depths. I screamed and stumbled back, falling into Jack's arms. The eyes vanished and the humming stopped abruptly. The forest fell into an oppressive silence. Jack tried to reassure me, but his own fear was evident. "We need to leave now," I insisted, my voice shaking. We turned to retrace our steps, but the path we had taken seemed to have disappeared. Panic set in as we wandered, unable to find our way back. The forest seemed to shift around us, every tree looking the same, every path leading to nowhere. Hours passed, and darkness enveloped the forest. Our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows. We were hopelessly lost. Exhausted and terrified, we decided to set up camp and wait for daylight. As we huddled together, we heard whispers, barely audible, as if the forest itself was speaking to us. The voices were indistinguishable, but their tone was menacing. Suddenly, Jack's flashlight caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of our campsite. It was a tall, shadowy silhouette, its features obscured. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, but there was no response. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. We kept our eyes on the figure, but as the hours dragged on, exhaustion overcame us. When I awoke at dawn, the figure was gone, but something far more horrifying awaited me. Jack was missing. Frantic, I searched the campsite, calling his name, but there was no answer. The forest seemed to mock my desperation with its silence. Then I noticed a trail of disturbed leaves leading deeper into the woods. Following the trail, I reached the clearing with the ancient oak and the well. My heart pounded as I approached, the humming now faintly audible again. Trembling, I looked into the well. Jack's face stared back at me from the depths, his eyes vacant, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. I screamed and fell back, shaking uncontrollably. But then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Jack running toward me, out of breath and looking worried. "Sarah, are you okay?" he shouted. I was too stunned to speak. He knelt beside me, his face full of concern. "I'm fine. I thought you were in the well," I stammered. "I just went to look for a way out," he explained. "I heard you scream and came running back." Relief washed over me, but the fear lingered. We needed to leave this place. Together, we retraced our steps, finally finding a familiar trail as the first light of dawn broke through the trees. We made it out of Green Hollow Forest that morning, vowing never to return. The forest had shown us its dark side, and we were lucky to escape with our lives. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching us, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what it lost. I write this now as a warning. If you ever find yourself in Green Hollow Forest and you come across a path not marked on your map, turn back. Do not follow it. For the forest holds secrets that are best left undiscovered, and once you enter its darkest depths, it may never let you go. My name is Emily, and I live in the city now, but when I was a kid, I lived in a secluded mountain area with my parents and my grandma. Our house was the only one for miles, surrounded by dense forest. It was a peaceful, beautiful place, but it also held a mystery that has haunted me for years. As a child, I loved playing in the forest. The towering trees and winding paths were my playground. I would spend hours exploring, imagining adventures in the wilderness. It was during one of these explorations that I first saw him. I was about 8 years old. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was wandering deeper into the forest than usual, following a small stream. I was looking for frogs when I saw him for the first time. He was standing a little way off, half hidden by the trees. He looked eerily similar to me, with the same dark hair and curious eyes. I felt an odd sense of calm seeing him, like meeting an old friend. I waved and called out, "Hi, what's your name?" But he didn't respond. He didn't move or come closer. He just stood there, staring at me. After a while, I shrugged and went back to catching frogs. When I looked up again, he was gone. The second time I saw him was a few weeks later. I was playing near an old oak tree that I liked to climb. As I reached the top, I looked down and saw him again. This time he was closer, standing at the base of the tree, looking up at me. I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. "Do you want to play?" I called down to him, but again, he didn't answer. He just stood there, silently watching me. I climbed down, hoping he would stay, but when my feet touched the ground, he had disappeared. I remember feeling a bit disappointed, but I brushed it off as my imagination. The third time was during a chilly autumn evening. The leaves were turning, and the forest was a riot of red and gold. I was gathering leaves to press in my scrapbook when I saw him standing by the stream again. This time, he was even closer, just across the water from me. "Why do you keep following me?" I asked, feeling braver than before. He looked at me with those familiar eyes, and I felt a strange connection to him, like he was a part of me. But still, he didn't speak. I decided to try and cross the stream to get closer, but as I stepped into the water, he faded away into the shadows. The last time I saw him was the most unsettling. It was late winter, and the forest was covered in snow. I was out with my sled, playing on the small hills near our house. The forest was quiet, the only sound the crunch of snow under my boots. As I climbed back up a hill after a fast slide, I saw him standing at the edge of the trees. This time, he was the closest he had ever been. I could see every detail of his face, and it was like looking into a mirror. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He just stared back, his expression calm and almost sad. I felt tears prick at my eyes for some reason I couldn't understand. I wanted to go to him, to touch him, but something held me back. After a long moment, he turned and walked into the trees, disappearing from sight. Eventually, I left for the city to attend university. My visits back home became less frequent, and I didn't have time to wander in the forest anymore. The boy became a distant memory, a strange and almost forgotten part of my childhood. One evening, during one of my rare visits home, we were having dinner when I suddenly remembered the boy. Curious, I asked my parents, "Have you ever seen a boy in the forest who looks a lot like me when I was younger?" Their reaction was immediate and unsettling. They exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. "What do you mean?" "Emily," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told them about the boy I used to see, how he would just stand there and watch me. The fear on their faces was unmistakable. "We've never seen any boy in the forest," my father said, his voice strained. "We're the only ones living here." That night as I lay in bed, my mind raced with questions. Why were they so scared? Who was the boy I saw? The next morning, my grandmother took me aside. She looked troubled, as if she had been up all night thinking. "Emily," she began softly, "there's something you need to know. Before you were born, your parents had another child, a boy. He looked just like you when you were small. But when he was 4 years old, he died of malaria. His grave is deep in the forest. Your parents never told you because they didn't want you to be afraid of the forest." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Could the boy I saw be the spirit of my brother? It seemed impossible, yet it made a twisted kind of sense. My grandmother and I had no answers, but the story left us both feeling deeply unsettled. I've never gone back to that part of the forest. The thought of it terrifies me now. I can't explain what I saw or why the boy looked so much like me. Perhaps he was trying to tell me something, or maybe he just wanted to be near his sister. To this day, I can't shake the eerie feeling that the boy is still out there, watching and waiting. The forest that was once my playground now feels like a haunted, forbidden place, and the memory of the ghostly boy, my brother, remains a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the woods.